Elana Cates, and so I know we haven't finished the movie, but we're still going to talk about some comparisons between the film and the book, and I have some clips that we can go to that we haven't seen yet. So we've already kind of gone over the background of Jean-Dominique Bauby and the book. The film was released in 2007. It's French, even though some American studios really wanted to take it on, but the director and the producers thought that it would be best, in French, the way that it was supposed to be, or the way that it was written. So that's the director, Julien Schnabel, and that's the decision he made to make it in French. So yeah, we're just going to jump right into some comparisons. So some things that I noticed, and then we can all discuss at the end, some important distinctions. So first we can talk about the book. First of all, it's an autobiography, which is a really important distinction from the film. It's Bauby's own story told by himself in the first person. It's his perspective, and it's in the past tense. He's talking about memories from before, and he's also talking about once he had his stroke and in the hospital, how he learned the alphabet instead of, in the movie, it's a story about him in the third person, so we see him learn the alphabet instead of him telling us about it. But there are limitations to his autobiography because he wasn't the one sitting down writing it. His transcriber, Claude, I don't speak French, Mendeville, she was the one actually writing it down. And the book that we read is actually a translation. So going from French to English, if anyone speaks a second language, you know that there are some words that don't quite express the same thing in the same language. So there are some barriers to it being an autobiography, but it still is very different than the film in third person. In addition to the film being in third person and past or present tense, as opposed to an I statement in the book, cinematographically, if that's a word, it's also sometimes in the third person, and that's a really important distinction because there's sometimes things that we see that Bauby can't see, and in the book we only see what he sees and his perspective on everything, while in the film we can see other characters and see what they're feeling that Bauby himself doesn't even see. And then another really important distinction is that it's Bauby's words versus a screenwriter's words. And the movie was made 11 years after his death, so there's no way for the screenwriter and the director to consult him and say, is this how you wanted it to be? So those are just things that we have to keep in mind when we're reading the book, but when we're also watching the film, that there are things to keep note of. So another thing that we can talk about is tone. We've all supposedly read the book by now. So something that we all kind of noticed and have discussed is that there's this humorous, kind of optimistic tone sometimes in the book that despite everything that he's gone through, he still remains pretty upbeat and has kind of inserts these little witty comments in there. So I just found 3 that I thought were pretty funny. When a fly settles on his nose and he can't obviously move it to get it off, he says Olympic wrestling is child's play compared to this. When he's learning how to speak the alphabet again, he's struggling with the letter L, which he finds amusing because he's the editor-in-chief of L and he can't even pronounce the name of his own magazine. And I've lost 66 pounds in just 20 weeks when I began a diet a week before my stroke. I never dreamed of such a dramatic result. So even though he's going through something that is unimaginable for us, he's still able to keep a positive attitude and have this humorous tone with him. And this translates into the film as he narrates a lot of it, the actor narrates a lot of it, and inserts these little comments that are funny, or some of them are kind of womanizer-y, but he's still able to be himself, and his friends describe him as someone who was funny and characteristically so just because he's in this position doesn't mean he can't keep his humorous tone. But, of course, at other times, the tone becomes very dramatic because obviously what he's been through has really affected him. So here in the book are some lines that are very sad and evoke that tone. Are you there, Jean-Do? She asks anxiously over there, and I have to admit at times I don't know anymore. When he's talking about his bath time, sometimes he can find it amusing, but then other times it makes him unbearably sad, and he cries. And on Father's Day with his children at the beach, we've all discussed this quote many times, but that he can't touch his son, and that's really sad for him. And in the film we see this too by his narration, but we also see it on our own through visuals and music and sound and the absence of sound. For example, this last one when he's at the beach with his son, he doesn't say this exact quote, but we see his son crying in his mother's arms, and Jean-Do is sitting right there and he just can't do anything. And so we still get that same emotion and that same tone, but it's not said and we don't read it. So going off of that, the tone can be evoked by sounds. I found music to be a really interesting part of both the film and the book. In the film, obviously, there's a soundtrack to the film, and a lot of it is a piano score, which we talked about last class. I can't see your name card, but Ava, you were talking about how the music and the piano at some scenes is, it just heightens your emotion and makes you feel more sad than if it was just silence. And when you're reading the book, you can't, unless you're listening to music as well, I guess, but you can't get that same emotion from both visual and sound. When he remembers his previous life in the movie, it's always upbeat music that evokes a happy emotion when he thinks about his past. For example, when he remembers that he was the editor of Elle, this song Chains of Love begins, and it's like this heavy metal rock song, and it evokes a lot of, it shows that his life was really glamorous and something that he enjoyed. And then La Mer is the song that opens the movie, but La Mer also plays when Balby's stroke starts, which we haven't seen this scene, and I linked it, so if you want to watch it, I don't know if we have time.
I think it's okay.
Okay, well, we can watch it. This is not it, this is bad.
Wix makes it easy to create your own stunning website.
Il va pleuvoir. Attends, je m'arrête. Je vais arrêter.
La mer, on va danser, on les vols de soleil. Ah, les vols de soleil, la chanson, la mer. Les vols de l'étendard, la mer. Au ciel d'été, on prend les avec le vent.
It keeps going, but we can stop there because we're almost out of time. Yeah, so if anyone's ever heard this song or read the lyrics in the English translation, La Mer is about the sea and kind of tranquility, and in this scene that's the opposite of tranquility, but it's also about kind of the unpredictability of the waves and the ocean, which is really fitting for that scene when his stroke begins. And then music is also a part of the book as well. He references a lot of music, and especially French music. When he's on the beach with his children on Father's Day, his daughter starts singing a really old French song that he remembers from his childhood. But A Day in the Life is a Beatles song. It's really famous, and this A Day in the Life is the name of the chapter when he describes how his stroke happened. So here are some lyrics, just a few of them from the song, and they're kind of eerie how they relate. That he read the news today, it was rather sad, but he had to laugh, and Bobby inserts a lot of humor into his book, and that he is famous, so people have seen his face before. But what's really interesting about the song is that it's the name of the chapter, but it also is playing when he's going to get his son, and then once his stroke starts, he thinks of it again and those lyrics. And when he's on the way to the hospital, he says that he feels like he just took LSD, and this song is about drugs, and specifically LSD. So that's just kind of ironic there. And when he realizes he can't speak or move anymore, he thinks of, the song has this really famous piano crescendo at the end. If anyone's ever heard it, you know what I'm talking about. It's this, like, I don't know, 2-minute long crescendo, and that's what he's thinking about right before he goes unconscious. So this was just something I found really interesting that's both in the film and the book, but in different ways. So this is, I guess, where we can start discussion. I can start it. These are just some things that I've noticed, and then we can open it up and talk about differences between the film and the book. So with the film, we have visuals, obviously, and it's a personal choice whether you think seeing is better than reading. For example, in the very beginning, we were talking about last class when the images are very fuzzy and it's claustrophobic and it makes you a little tense. Is seeing that make you feel more like Jean Doe in the time, or does reading it make you feel more like that? But we also have to remember, of course, that this is a filmmaker's choice of what Jean Doe is seeing. We don't really know exactly what he saw in that time. Sounds, we just talked about music, but there's also the absence of sound and what that means when Jean Doe is alone in his hospital room and the TV isn't on, or it is when it's just a flat line and we hear that and it's uncomfortable. What emotion does that evoke? The third person view we already talked about filming it, that we can see things that Bobby doesn't see. And then additions and omissions. We talked about last class about how the filmmakers decided to put his ex-wife in the movie more so than in the book. So how does that contribute to the story when it's in the movie? Or what was taken out? And in the book we talked about that it's an autobiography, it's his exact words, but there are limitations to that because it's a translation and transcribed from him blinking his eye, but it's still as more first person than the film. And then the written word, we always talk about in English or creative writing that the written word is better because you're allowed to imagine it yourself, but that's still different than what Jean Doe wanted or saw for himself. So there are limitations and pros and cons to each of them. So I guess we can open it up and see what you guys thought, film versus book. Yeah.
I personally like the film a lot better just because I felt like I had a better understanding of like what he was going through with the visual. But I feel like it's also like knowing that they kind of wrote out the girlfriend character and had his ex-wife and like a role that she didn't actually fill. It's like also kind of like a negative almost because it's not really super accurate.
Right. Yeah, going off that, something that I was thinking about a lot is that you have to remember that it's a film, and so filmmakers and producers want to make a successful movie that will do good at the box office. So that's just something you have to keep in mind, that what's going to sell versus Bobby's book is just him writing for the sake of writing. He wanted to share his story.